Chapter 1. The Origin of the Elves. Introduction. Elves are one of the most mythologized creatures in world beliefs. Their images range from light, graceful creatures to dark and sinister spirits. The origins of elves can be found in various cultures: Scandinavian, Germanic, Celtic, and even Greek. In this chapter, we will consider how elves were perceived in ancient times. Elves in Norse mythology. Norse elves, or alphas, alfar, were divided into two categories: light elves, ljósalfar, and dark elves, dökkalfar. Light elves were beings of light and beauty, close to the gods, while dark elves were associated with the underworld and had a sinister nature. The light elves were said to live in Alfheim, while the dark elves lived in underground caves. Celtic beliefs. The Celts saw elves as nature spirits that could bring both good luck and bad luck. Elves were often associated with places of power, forests, rivers, and mountains. The Celts believed that elves could influence the fate of people and often depicted them as protectors of nature. Different types of elves. In different regions, the image of elves had its own characteristics. For example, in Germanic folklore, elves were invisible spirits that manifested their presence by influencing natural phenomena, strong winds, storms, or moonlight. Elves were expected to do both good and evil deeds. Elves' connection to nature. One of the key elements in all mythologies is the connection of elves to nature. Elves could control natural forces or protect certain places. They were perceived as keepers of magical knowledge about the earth and its resources. Second Chapter 2. Elves in Medieval Europe. Introduction. In medieval Europe, the image of elves underwent significant changes. With the advent of Christianity, they began to be perceived as beings having a connection with the devil or magic. Elves became part of folklore stories about evil forces and magical interventions. Elves as spirits and wizards. In medieval folklore, elves appear as small evil spirits that harm people. They were often accused of spreading diseases to livestock or people. Such demonization of the elves was partly due to the Christian worldview, which did not accept pagan beliefs. Changes in the image of elves. Christianity also influenced the image of elves as insidious, cunning creatures that can influence people's lives by bringing them misfortune or kidnapping them. This motif is often found in legends about children kidnapped by elves. Folklore legends about elves. Medieval legends of Great Britain particularly vividly show elves as magical creatures that can both help and harm people. In Welsh and Scottish folklore, elves were sometimes associated with fairies or little people who possessed magical powers. Evil elves and magic. Especially popular was the idea that elves could use magic to seduce people or create illusions. This characteristic of elves became part of the later literary image. Chapter 3. Elves in Modern Literature. Introduction. With the beginning of the era of Romanticism in the 19th century, the image of elves changed radically. They became symbols of beauty, mystery, and harmony with nature. In this part, we will consider how the literature of the time revived elves as positive characters. Elves in Shakespeare's literature. One of the most famous examples of elves in literature is William Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream, where elves are presented as funny and cunning creatures who play a role in the events that happen around humans. Their antics and magical charms are intertwined with the romantic adventures of the heroes. Fairy Tales by the Brothers Grimm. In the fairy tales by the Brothers Grimm, elves are often depicted as tiny creatures that help people. The fairy tale, The Elves and the Shoemaker, describes the elves who do work for a poor shoemaker at night, emphasizing them as good helpers. Romanticism and elves. Romantic writers turn to the image of elves as a symbol of the rebirth of nature and mysterious forces that cannot be explained by rational thinking. Elves became the embodiment of spirits living on the border of two worlds, human and natural. Influence on later literature. Literary images of elves at the beginning of the 19th century laid the foundation for their further popularization in fantasy works. Their images became an inspiration for writers of the 20th century. Chapter 4: The Modern Image of Elves in Pop Culture. Introduction. The 20th century was a time of revival of elves thanks to fantasy literature. The image of elves in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien was especially popular, which had a huge influence on the modern idea of elves. Tolkien and Middle-earth. In his works, Tolkien created a whole world where elves are wise, immortal beings who possess magic and live in harmony with nature. They are opposed to people who lose touch with nature over time. Tolkien's elves became an archetype for many other works.
Elves in the fantasy genre. After the success of Tolkien, elves have become a part of all the great fantasy worlds, such as The Witcher by Andrzej Sapkowski or Dungeons & Dragons. Their image as magical, but at the same time powerful creatures, is firmly established in the fantasy genre. Elves in video games and TV shows. The popularity of elves has not escaped modern media either. They have become key characters in popular video games, such as World of Warcraft, Skyrim, as well as in films and series such as The Lord of the Rings or The Chronicles of Narnia. Chapter 5: Elves in Modern Beliefs and Subcultures. Introduction. Despite technological progress, in many cultures of the world, elves continue to be a part of modern beliefs. This is especially true in countries like Iceland, where belief in invisible beings remains strong. Icelandic elves. In Iceland, many people still believe in the real existence of elves, or Holdufolk. Some believe that elves reside in certain places and therefore avoid building roads or buildings in those areas so as not to anger them. Elves in subcultures. In today's subculture, especially among New Age fans, elves have become a symbol of a return to nature and spirituality. Their image is used in various practices related to meditation or belief in magical beings.